My hands trembled as I tried to steady myself against the ballroom wall, watching my mother's perfectly glossed lips curve into her most condescending smile. "Samantha has always been our biggest disappointment," she announced to the wedding. Guests gathered around the bride and groom's table, her voice carrying that particular blend of faux concern and genuine disdain that she'd perfected over the years. While her sister Jessica found success in law, Samantha chose to waste her MBA chasing some ridiculous wellness company fantasy. The pearls around her neck gleamed under the chandelier light as she gestured dismissively in my direction. My father nodded sagely, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "We keep hoping she'll come to her senses and join a real corporation, but she insists on playing entrepreneur with her little meditation app business." What they didn't know, what nobody in this opulent Chicago ballroom knew, was that exactly 72 hours ago, I had signed the final acquisition papers selling MindSpace Wellness to Headspace Technologies for $87 million. And in less than 10 minutes, their own boss would walk through those very doors to congratulate me personally. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Fairmont Chicago's Grand Ballroom sparkled with understated elegance, its crystal chandeliers casting dancing shadows across the sea of white linens and gold accents. Jessica's wedding had been planned for 18 months, every detail meticulously orchestrated by our mother, Victoria Chen Morrison, whose reputation as Chicago's premier social strategist depended on events like these going flawlessly. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's corporate elite, investment banking partners, tech executives, and old money families whose names graced building facades throughout the loop. I smoothed my navy blue bridesmaid dress, the same shade, that had been deemed appropriately subdued for someone of my questionable life choices. At 31, I was the elder sister by 3 years, yet I felt like the family's perpetual black sheep. Jessica stood radiant in her Vera Wang gown, her medical degree from Northwestern, and her engagement to David Kim, a rising star at Goldman Sachs, representing everything our parents had envisioned for both their daughters. The wedding party photos had been particularly excruciating. While posing for what felt like hundreds of shots, Aunt Linda had made her usual inquiry about my little hobby business. Cousin Rachel had offered to introduce me to her friend who was doing amazingly well in pharmaceutical sales. Even Jessica's new mother-in-law had suggested I consider going back to school for a more practical degree, since my current venture seemed so uncertain. Each comment felt like a paper cut, individually small but collectively bleeding me dry. What made it worse was the genuine concern in their voices, the absolute certainty that they were helping me see reason. In their minds, MindSpace was at best a passion project that had outlived its usefulness, and at worst a stubborn refusal to accept reality and join the conventional workforce. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, when I'd left my position as a management consultant at McKinsey to develop my mental wellness platform, the family reaction had been swift and unforgiving. My parents had spent a fortune on my education, at Wharton, expecting me to follow a path similar to Jessica's linear trajectory from pre-med to medical school to residency. Instead, I'd taken my business strategy background and combined it with my personal passion for mindfulness and mental health, creating an app that made meditation and wellness coaching accessible to busy professionals. The development process had been grueling. I'd spent 2 years living in a studio apartment in Lincoln Park, surviving on ramen and determination while building the platform from the ground up. My technical co-founder, Maya Patel, and I had maxed out our credit cards, worked 90-hour weeks, and pivoted our business model 4 times before finding our groove. We'd started with corporate wellness contracts, offering meditation programs, to stressed-out employees at major firms across Chicago. Our breakthrough came when we developed an AI-powered wellness coach that could personalize meditation and stress management techniques based on user behavior and biometric data. The platform combined live coaching sessions with on-demand content, creating a comprehensive ecosystem for mental health support. What began as a simple meditation app evolved into a revolutionary approach to preventive mental health care. The family gatherings during those early years had been brutal. Christmas dinners where my father would lecture about the importance of stable income and realistic expectations. Birthday parties where relatives would ask when I was planning to get serious about my career. Easter brunches where my mother would introduce me to young men from good families who worked in respectable professions. Jessica had tried to be supportive, but even she struggled to understand what I was building. As a pediatric surgeon, her world was concrete and measurable. She saved lives, earned a substantial salary, and could point to tangible results of her work. My success metrics of user engagement, retention rates, and stress reduction scores seemed abstract by comparison. The lowest point had come during last Thanksgiving when my father had actually used the word delusional during grace, asking God to help me see sense. My mother had nodded along, adding that they were concerned about my financial security and wondering aloud whether I'd exhausted my savings on this experiment. What they didn't see was the impact we were making. By year 2, MindSpace had over 1 million active users across North America. Our corporate wellness programs were being implemented by Fortune 500 companies, reducing employee sick days by an average of 30% and increasing productivity metrics significantly. We'd raised Series A funding, moved into sleek offices overlooking the Chicago River, and hired a team of 43 employees, including leading psychologists, meditation experts, and technology specialists. The acquisition talks with Headspace had begun 6 months ago, initiated by their CEO who'd been tracking our meteoric growth and innovative approach to personalized wellness. Unlike other meditation apps that offered generic content, MindSpace had cracked the code on truly individualized mental health support, using advanced algorithms to adapt techniques to each user's specific stress patterns, life circumstances, and emotional needs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya had been skeptical at first. We'd built something revolutionary, and part of her wanted to remain independent, to see how far we could scale on our own. But the offer from Headspace represented more than just financial success. It was validation that our approach to mental wellness could impact millions of lives globally, backed by resources we couldn't access independently. The due diligence process had been intense, requiring me to travel between Chicago, San Francisco, and London for months of meetings. I'd told my family I was consulting again, letting them assume I'd given up on MindSpace and returned to more conventional work. It was easier than explaining the complexity of acquisition negotiations to people who'd never believed in my vision in the first place. The final negotiations had concluded on Wednesday morning in a conference room overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. $87 million for a company that my parents still referred to as a hobby. The wire transfer had cleared yesterday morning. I was officially, quietly, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the wellness technology space. Now, standing in the corner of my sister's wedding reception, watching my parents hold court with Chicago's business elite, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. This moment of triumph was tinged with the isolating reality that the people who should have celebrated my success had never even taken the time to understand what I was building. The wedding coordinator approached our table, clipboard in hand and expression slightly frazzled. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Harrison has confirmed he'll be joining us shortly. He apologizes for missing the ceremony, but wanted to be here for the reception to congratulate Jessica personally." My mother's eyes lit up. Richard Harrison was the managing partner at Morrison & Associates, the public relations firm where both my parents worked. He was also one of Chicago's most influential business figures, sitting on boards of major corporations and wielding considerable power in the city's corporate ecosystem. His presence at Jessica's wedding was both a professional courtesy and a social coup for my parents. "Wonderful," my mother replied, her voice taking on that particular breathless quality she reserved for impressing important people. Richard specifically mentioned wanting to meet Jessica's new husband. He's always interested in supporting young talent. My father leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Harrison's been talking about expanding the firm's tech sector. Clients. Having David's Goldman connections couldn't hurt our positioning. Everything was always about positioning with my parents, about leveraging relationships and managing impressions." Jessica laughed, radiant in her happiness and blissfully unaware of the undercurrents of family tension. "I can't believe Richard Harrison is coming to my wedding. Remember when we were little and you'd point him out at society events, calling him the most powerful man in Chicago? He built his empire from nothing," my father said approvingly. "Started with one small agency and turned it into a multi-million-dollar operation. That's the kind of entrepreneurship that actually works, focused on proven business models and real clients." The irony was suffocating. Here they were, praising entrepreneurial success while simultaneously dismissing my own achievements. I caught Maya's eye across the room where she was chatting with some of David's tech friends. She raised her eyebrows and I shook my head slightly, a silent communication that we'd perfected during countless family gatherings, where I'd had to pretend my company was still struggling. Maya had flown in from San Francisco specifically for the wedding. One of the few people who understood the complete picture of what MindSpace had become. She'd offered to be my emotional support system, knowing how difficult these family events could be. Her presence was both comforting and a reminder of the professional world where my achievements were recognized and celebrated. The conversation at our table had shifted to Jessica's honeymoon plans, a 2-week trip to Bali that would include mindfulness retreats and yoga sessions. The irony wasn't lost on me that my sister was planning to pay thousands of dollars for experiences that my app provided daily to millions of users worldwide. But pointing that out would only invite more lectures about the difference between real travel and digital experiences. My phone buzzed with a text from our head of communications. "Press release goes live Monday morning. WSJ wants an exclusive interview Tuesday. You ready for this?" I smiled slightly, thinking about how different my life would be in 72. Hours when the news of the acquisition became public. The wellness industry was relatively small, and an $87 million deal would make waves across multiple sectors. My parents would definitely hear about it, probably from colleagues at Morrison & Associates who tracked major business news for potential client opportunities. Aunt Linda approached our table, champagne glass in hand, and that particular look in her eye that suggested she was about to offer unsolicited life advice. At 55, she'd never been married, had no children, but somehow felt qualified to guide everyone else's major life decisions. "Samantha, dear," she began, settling into the empty chair beside me. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. My neighbor's daughter just started at a wonderful consulting firm, and they're specifically looking for people with your educational background. I could make an introduction." I smiled politely, the same smile I'd perfected over years of fielding similar suggestions. "That's very kind of you, Aunt Linda, but I'm quite happy with my current work." "But sweetheart," she continued, her voice taking on that tone adults use with stubborn children, "at some point you have to think about stability, retirement savings, health insurance that doesn't depend on hoping your little app makes money." My mother leaned forward, sensing an opportunity to reinforce her position. "Linda's absolutely right. We worry about Samantha's financial future. These startup things are so unpredictable." "Actually," Aunt Linda said, warming to her theme, "I read an article last week about how most small businesses fail within the first 5 years. The statistics are really quite sobering." I nodded along, taking a sip of champagne to avoid responding. Immediately. 3 years ago, comments like these would have sent me into spirals of self-doubt. I'd spent countless nights wondering if they were right, if I was being naive and irresponsible. Even during MindSpace's most successful periods, their disapproval had colored my achievements, making me question whether I was measuring success correctly. But now, with $87 million in my bank account and thousands of positive user testimonials in my email inbox, their concern seemed almost quaint. The gap between their perception and reality had grown so wide that bridging it seemed impossible. The wellness industry is particularly volatile, my father added, joining the conversation. People's interest in these meditation trends comes and goes. Remember when everyone was into yoga 10 years ago? Now those studios are closing left and right. Maya appeared at my shoulder like a guardian angel. Sorry to interrupt, she said smoothly. But Samantha, the photographer wants to get some photos of you with the tech crowd. Apparently, Jessica mentioned you work in wellness technology? I stood gratefully, excusing myself from the table. As we walked away, Maya whispered, "You looked like you needed rescuing." "Always," I replied, then louder. "Maya, remind me, what did the final user satisfaction scores look like in this quarter's report?" 94%, she answered proudly. And our enterprise client retention rate is at 97%. Microsoft just renewed for another 2 years. These weren't hobbyist numbers. These were industry-leading metrics that represented real impact on real people's lives. But explaining that to my family would require them to first acknowledge that mental wellness was a legitimate business sector, that technology could create meaningful change in people's daily experience, and that success could be measured in ways beyond traditional corporate hierarchies. The photographer, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, directed us toward the windows overlooking Grant Park. As she adjusted her lighting, she chatted with us about her own experience, with meditation apps specifically praising MindSpace's personalized approach. "I love how it actually adapts to your schedule," she was saying. "Like, if I have a crazy wedding weekend, it suggests these quick stress relief techniques instead of trying to make me commit to 30-minute sessions." Maya and I exchanged amused glances. Here was a stranger, someone with no reason to flatter or impress me, offering unprompted validation of what we'd built. It was a stark contrast to the skepticism I faced from my own family members. The photographer continued snapping photos while describing how MindSpace had helped her manage anxiety during particularly stressful work periods. Her testimonial was similar to thousands we received monthly, stories of people finding tools to handle depression, sleep disorders, work burnout, and relationship stress. "You know," she said, adjusting her camera settings, "I heard MindSpace got acquired by Headspace for some crazy amount. My friend works in tech PR and said it was one of the biggest wellness deals of the year." My stomach fluttered. The news wasn't supposed to be public until Monday, but clearly rumors were starting to circulate in industry circles. Maya subtly squeezed my hand, a reminder to stay calm and not confirm anything prematurely. "The industry's definitely consolidating," I said carefully. "A lot of interesting partnerships happening." Just then, a commotion near the ballroom entrance caught our attention. Several heads turned toward the doors, and I could hear my mother's distinctive laugh carrying across the room. Richard Harrison had arrived, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the space. Even from across the room, his confidence was palpable, the kind of authority that comes from decades of building and running successful businesses. He was shorter than I'd expected, maybe 5'8", but his presence filled the room disproportionately. Perfectly tailored suit, silver hair that suggested distinguished wisdom rather than age, and the kind of genuine smile that made everyone feel like the most important person in the conversation. My parents descended on him immediately, my mother practically glowing with excitement. I could see them pointing toward Jessica and David, clearly eager to make introductions. The power dynamics in the room shifted subtly, conversations orienting themselves around his presence. "Should we go say hello?" Maya asked, though she knew I'd prefer to avoid the inevitable awkwardness. "Let's give them a few minutes to do their thing," I replied, watching my parents bask in the reflected glory of Harrison's attention. But even as I tried to maintain my distance, I could feel the pull of family obligation. This was Jessica's wedding, and Harrison was here specifically to celebrate her achievements. Avoiding him entirely would be noticed and commented upon later. The photographer finished our session, and Maya and I made our way back toward the main conversation area. As we walked, I found myself thinking about all the times I'd imagined this moment, when my success would finally be undeniable to my family. I'd pictured vindication, apologies, maybe even pride. But now that it was imminent, I felt mostly sad that it had taken external validation to make them reconsider their assessment of my choices. We paused near the dessert table, watching Richard. Harrison charmed the wedding party. He had that rare ability to make everyone feel heard and important, asking detailed questions about David's work at Goldman, complimenting Jessica on her medical career, and somehow making each conversation feel personal and genuine. "Mrs. Morrison," he was saying to my mother, "you must be incredibly proud of both your daughters. Jessica's surgical reputation precedes her, and I understand Samantha has made quite a name for herself in the technology sector." My mother's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. "Oh, well, Samantha has been. Exploring the wellness industry. We keep hoping she'll transition into something more established." My father nodded along. "She's very creative, but we'd love to see her apply those skills in a more traditional business environment." Harrison's expression grew curious. "Wellness technology is actually one of the fastest-growing sectors we're tracking at the firm. Have you been following the major consolidation happening in that space?" I could see my parents exchanging glances, clearly out of their depth when it came to tech industry trends. My father cleared his throat. "We don't really follow those kinds of niche markets." "Interesting," Harrison mused, "because I'm here tonight partly to congratulate Samantha on the MindSpace acquisition. Headspace paying $87 million for her company is one of the biggest wellness tech deals we've seen this year." The silence that followed was deafening. The crystal champagne flute slipped from my mother's perfectly manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor in what seemed like slow motion. The sound cut through the ambient wedding chatter like a gunshot, but the silence that followed Harrison's words was even more deafening. My father's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching horror as the reality of what he'd just heard began to sink in. "I'm sorry," my mother stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you say $87 million? Harrison's smile widened, clearly oblivious to the family bombshell he'd just detonated. "Indeed, MindSpace has been a phenomenon in the wellness tech space. Samantha's approach to personalized mental health support has revolutionized how we think about preventive care. The acquisition is a brilliant strategic move by Headspace to dominate the enterprise wellness market." Jessica stood frozen between her new husband and her bouquet, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. David, who worked in tech investment banking at Goldman, recovered first, his professional training kicking in despite the personal shock. "Wait," he said slowly, his voice filled with dawning realization. "You're telling me Samantha built MindSpace? The MindSpace? We just pitched a client on implementing their corporate wellness program last month. Their user engagement metrics are insane." Maya squeezed my arm supportively as every eye in our immediate vicinity turned toward me. The small circle of family members and close friends had grown as Harrison's pronouncement rippled outward, drawing curious guests like a magnet. Aunt Linda looked like she'd been slapped. Cousin Rachel was frantically Googling on her phone. Even the wedding photographer had paused, sensing the dramatic shift in the room's energy. My father's voice came out as a croak. "You sold the meditation app, for $87 million. The way he said meditation app made it sound like I'd been selling friendship bracelets at a craft fair. But for the first time in years, there was no condescension in his tone, just pure, unadulterated shock. The acquisition closed Wednesday, I said simply, my voice steadier than I felt. The press release goes public Monday morning. Harrison beamed with genuine pleasure, clearly delighted to be sharing what he considered wonderful news. I've been following MindSpace's trajectory for the past 18 months. The company's impact on workplace mental health has been extraordinary. They've reduced employee sick days by an average of 38% across their enterprise. Clients and their AI-driven personalization has a user retention rate that puts most social media platforms to shame. He turned to my parents with evident enthusiasm. You must be incredibly proud. Samantha has created something truly transformative. In my 40 years in business, I've rarely seen a founder execute with such precision and vision. The way she bootstrapped the initial development, secured enterprise contracts before most competitors even understood the market, and then scaled globally while maintaining such high-quality standards. It's exactly the kind of entrepreneurship that changes industries. My mother finally found her voice, though it sounded strangely hollow. We didn't realize the scope of what she'd built. The modesty runs in the family, I see, Harrison chuckled, though something in his expression suggested he was beginning to sense the undercurrents of family tension. Though I have to say, in this industry, the founders who work quietly and let their results speak tend to build the most sustainable companies. Samantha's approach has been refreshingly substance-focused. Jessica finally spoke, her voice small and confused. Sam, why didn't you tell us? All this time we thought you were struggling. Mom and Dad have been worried sick about your financial stability. The question hung in the air like a challenge. How could I explain 3 years of dismissal, doubt, and subtle humiliation? How could I describe the family dinners where my hobby business was treated like an embarrassing phase I couldn't seem to outgrow? The birthday parties where relatives made jokes about when I'd get a real job? The Christmas gatherings where my parents would literally change the subject when I tried to share my company's milestones. I tried to share updates, I said carefully, glancing around the circle of faces. But there seemed to be a general consensus that what I was building wasn't legitimate business. Maya stepped slightly forward, her loyalty evident in her posture. Samantha presented at the National Wellness Innovation Summit 2 years ago. Her keynote had a standing ovation. Forbes featured MindSpace in their Companies to Watch list. She was invited to speak at Harvard Business School about scaling conscious commerce. The signals were there. Aunt Linda had gone pale, clearly remembering her earlier comments about hobby businesses. The wedding photographer was now openly eavesdropping, no longer pretending to adjust her equipment. Several other guests had drifted closer, drawn by the unusual energy of the conversation. Harrison looked puzzled, glancing between my parents and me. I'm sorry, I seem to have misunderstood the family dynamics here. When I heard about the acquisition, I assumed you'd all be celebrating. MindSpace isn't just financially successful. It's having real social impact. Do you know how many people the platform has helped manage depression, anxiety, and workplace burnout? We're talking about a technology that's genuinely improving mental health outcomes on a massive scale. My father cleared his throat, his banker's training finally reasserting itself as he began to process the financial implications. 87 million. That would put Samantha's net worth at approximately 54 million. Depending on the equity structure, David supplied helpfully, his Goldman Sachs background making him instinctively calculate ownership percentages. The number seemed to echo in the ornate ballroom, ricocheting off the crystal chandeliers and marble columns. $54 million. More than my father would earn in his entire career. More than Jessica would make even as a successful surgeon. More than our family's accumulated wealth across 3 generations. Cousin Rachel looked up from her frantic Googling, her phone screen displaying MindSpace's website. "Oh my God, this is real. The company website says acquired by Headspace Technologies. There are articles about the deal in TechCrunch Business." Insider. "Sam, you're all over the financial news." The irony was almost overwhelming. For 3 years, I'd been treated like the family disappointment, the one who'd thrown away a prestigious education to chase an impractical dream. My parents had spent countless dinners explaining to friends and relatives why their eldest daughter was still figuring things out in her 30s, always with that particular tone of embarrassed concern. And now, at my sister's wedding, surrounded by Chicago's business elite, the truth was finally impossible to ignore. Harrison, ever the diplomat, seemed to sense the need to fill the uncomfortable silence. "I'm curious, Samantha. What's next for you post-acquisition? Are you staying on with Headspace?" "I'm joining as their Chief Innovation Officer," I replied, finding my voice growing stronger. "Leading their expansion into personalized therapeutic interventions and enterprise mental health. The acquisition isn't just financial, it's strategic. Headspace wants to transform how corporations approach employee wellness, and MindSpace's technology provides the foundation for truly individualized mental health support." "Smart move," David said admiringly. "The corporate wellness market is exploding. Our clients are spending millions on employee mental health initiatives. Having that level of personalization and data-driven insights, that's a game changer." My mother was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Samantha, why didn't you ever explain? I mean, we thought you were just making an app for meditation." It was a fair question, though her tone suggested she still didn't fully understand the complexity of what we'd built. How could I explain that MindSpace wasn't just an app for meditation? It was a comprehensive mental health ecosystem that used artificial intelligence to provide personalized therapeutic interventions, tracked biometric data to predict emotional crises before they occurred, and had partnerships with major healthcare providers to integrate mindfulness into medical treatment plans. Maya, sensing my internal struggle, stepped in smoothly. MindSpace created the first AI-powered mental health coach that could actually adapt its recommendations based on real-time stress indicators. The platform integrates with wearable technology, analyzes speech patterns for emotional state, and provides interventions customized to individual trauma histories and coping mechanisms. It's not meditation, it's preventive mental health care. Harrison nodded approvingly. Exactly. The technology essentially democratizes access to mental health support. Instead of waiting for people to reach crisis points, it provides early intervention tools that prevent deterioration. The implications for workplace productivity, healthcare costs, and general quality of life are enormous. I watched my father's expression change as the business implications became clearer. He'd spent his career in traditional corporate communications, but he understood market disruption when he saw it. "So you're saying Samantha identified a gap in the mental health system and built technology to fill it?" "More than that," Harrison replied enthusiastically. "She created an entirely new category of preventive mental health care. Before MindSpace, corporate wellness programs were mostly generic fitness challenges and basic counseling services. Samantha's platform proved that personalized, data-driven mental health support could deliver measurable improvements in employee performance and satisfaction." The conversation was interrupted by the wedding planner, a harried-looking woman in an elegant black dress who approached with evident concern. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to begin the toasts soon. The caterers need to know if we should proceed with dinner service." My mother looked momentarily lost, clearly struggling to shift mental gears from the shocking revelation about my success to the immediate demands of hosting a wedding. "Yes, of course. Jessica, darling, why don't we gather everyone for the toasts?" But Jessica wasn't ready to let the moment pass. She stepped closer to me, her wedding dress rustling with the movement. Sam, I need to understand this. You've been sitting through family dinners for 3 years while Mom and Dad. She trailed off, but the implication was clear. While they'd lectured me about financial responsibility and career prospects, I'd been building one of the most successful wellness technology companies in the country. While they'd worried about my future, I'd been creating a future for millions of users worldwide. I tried to share updates, I said again, more firmly this time. Remember when I told you about the Microsoft contract, the Mayo Clinic partnership, the TED Talk I gave in Vancouver? Every time I brought up MindSpace's growth, the conversation would shift to when I planned to get serious about my career. Aunt Linda made a small sound, possibly a whimper. She'd been one of the most vocal critics, frequently suggesting I consider more stable career options. The pharmaceutical sales opportunity she'd mentioned earlier now seemed almost insulting, in hindsight. Harrison looked increasingly uncomfortable with the family dynamics he'd inadvertently exposed. Perhaps I should let you all process this privately, he suggested diplomatically. Samantha, congratulations again on the acquisition. I'd love to discuss potential collaboration opportunities between your new role at Headspace and our wellness sector clients. We could schedule something for next week? I'd appreciate that, I replied, grateful for his professionalism in navigating the awkward situation. As Harrison excused himself to speak with other guests, the family circle contracted around me, like a tightening noose. The silence stretched uncomfortably until my father spoke, his voice carefully controlled. Samantha, I think we owe you an explanation. It was perhaps the first time in my adult life that my father had acknowledged owing me anything. The words hung in the air between us, weighted with years of accumulated misunderstanding and dismissal. We didn't understand, my mother added quietly. We saw you leaving a stable consulting career, living in that tiny apartment, working all hours. It looked like struggle, not success. The admission was both validating and heartbreaking. They'd been so focused on traditional markers of achievement, titles, salaries, office buildings, corporate benefits, that they'd missed the revolutionary nature of what I was creating. Did you ever ask? The question came out more sharply than I'd intended. Did you ever ask about user growth or revenue or impact metrics? Did you ever want to understand what we were building? My father's face flushed slightly. We assumed if it was going well, you'd tell us about it differently. Maya made a small sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. She'd witnessed enough family gatherings to know how my attempts to share good news were typically received. I tried, I said, feeling 3 years of frustration bubble to the surface. Remember when I told you about crossing 1 million users? Dad, you said numbers can be inflated in software. When I mentioned the Harvard Business School speaking invitation, Mom, you asked if they were paying me or if I was just getting exposure. The accusations landed like physical blows. I could see my parents processing their own words, perhaps hearing them clearly for the first time. How many times had their skepticism been interpreted as support? How many achievements had they unknowingly minimized? Jessica touched my arm gently. Sam, I'm sorry. We all failed you. I failed you. I should have asked more questions, should have understood what you were building. The medical device integration alone should have been a clue, David added, clearly reviewing what he knew about MindSpace from his industry perspective. When a wellness app partners with Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins for clinical trials, that's not a hobby. That's serious healthcare innovation. The wedding photographer appeared at our periphery again, this time looking genuinely concerned. Excuse me, but should I be documenting any of this? I mean, this seems like a significant family moment. No, I said quickly. The last thing I needed was photos of this confrontation appearing in the wedding album. This is private. But even as I declined the photos, I realized that this moment was already documenting itself in ways that would resonate far beyond tonight. The revelation had shifted every family relationship, recontextualized years of interactions, and forced everyone to reconsider their assumptions about success, support, and understanding. Maya's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it discreetly. "Sam, the acquisition is starting to trend on tech Twitter. Someone leaked ahead of the official announcement." I felt a flutter of panic. We'd planned for a controlled rollout of the news, carefully managed press releases, and strategic interviews. Having it leak at Jessica's wedding, in front of our parents who were still processing the basic reality of my success, felt chaotic and premature. "What does that mean?" my mother asked, clearly out of her depth with social media implications. "It means everyone in the tech industry will know by tomorrow," David explained grimly. "This is going to be big news. Female founder, bootstrap success story, major acquisition without venture capital involvement. It hits all the current business media trends." The weight of impending public attention settled over me like a heavy cloak. For 3 years, I'd been able to build MindSpace in relative privacy, without the pressure of public scrutiny or family opinion. Now both were about to descend simultaneously. "We need to go," I said decisively. "Maya, can you call our communications team? We need to get ahead of this narrative." But my mother reached out, her hand surprising me by gently catching my arm. "Wait, Samantha, please, don't leave angry. This is your sister's wedding, and I think we need to have a real conversation." The request stopped me short. In 31 years, I couldn't remember my mother ever asking me not to leave during a family conflict. Usually, departures were encouraged as a way to let everyone cool down. Code for avoiding difficult emotions and genuine resolutions. "What conversation?" I asked warily. "About how we failed you," my father said heavily. "About how we let our own narrow definition of success blind us to your achievements. About how we need to rebuild trust and understanding." Around us, the wedding reception continued its elegant progression. Guests chatted over cocktails, children in formal attire ran between tables, and the band played soft jazz that created a surreal soundtrack to our family reckoning. Jessica looked between me and our parents, her bridal makeup slightly smudged, with tears she'd tried to contain. "Please don't let this ruin tonight," she said softly. "But also, please don't let tonight pass without us fixing this." The vulnerability in her voice, the acknowledgement that things needed fixing, touched something deep in my chest. This was Jessica's wedding day, meant to be perfect and magical. But it was also the day when our family's carefully constructed facade had finally crumbled completely. "Okay," I said slowly, "but not here, not at your reception." Maya nodded, supportively. "I'll handle the communications crisis. Sam, take care of your family. The business can wait one more day." As she walked away to manage the growing media situation, I looked at my parents and sister, these people who had shaped my life in ways both positive and traumatic. The next conversation would determine whether we could build something new from the ruins of our old relationships, or whether tonight's revelation would only deepen the divide between us. The choice was no longer mine alone. For the first time in years, my family was asking to understand, rather than be understood. It was a small opening, but perhaps enough to begin healing 3 years of accumulated wounds. 3 hours later, we sat in my parents' unchanged study in their Lincoln Park brownstone, the same room where I'd once done homework at the antique oak desk, where my father had lectured me about practical career choices countless times before. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were having this conversation beneath his wall of achievement plaques and photographs with Chicago's business elite, a shrine to exactly the kind of conventional success I'd supposedly failed to achieve. Jessica had changed out of her wedding dress into jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt, her hair loose around her shoulders, making her look younger and more vulnerable. She sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, a position that would have horrified our mother during our formal upbringing, but now seemed appropriate for this unprecedented moment of family honesty. My mother had traded her elegant wedding attire for a silk blouse and slacks, though she maintained her perfect posture in the leather armchair. My father occupied his usual seat behind the desk, but instead of his typical commanding presence, he seemed diminished, uncertain. The acquisition documents Maya had rushed over lay spread across the coffee table, official paperwork making the abstract concept of $87 million suddenly, undeniably real. The Headspace Technologies logo was embossed at the top of each page, and my signature appeared dozens of times in blue ink, each one representing years of work finally recognized at its true value. "I keep staring at these numbers," my father said quietly, picking up the acquisition summary sheet. $87 million. Your equity stake. The employment terms with Headspace. He looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes since I was a child, genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "Samantha, help me understand what you built. Not the business terms, I can read those, but what you actually created." It was the first time he'd asked me to explain MindSpace without the underlying assumption that it was somehow deficient or temporary. The question contained an invitation I'd been waiting years to receive. "Dad, imagine if you could predict when someone was about to have a panic attack, not after they started feeling symptoms, but hours or even days before, based on their sleep patterns, typing speed, heart rate variability, and dozens of other microsignals their body was sending," I began, settling into the couch across from him. "Imagine if you could then provide exactly the right intervention. Maybe a specific breathing technique, a personalized meditation, a suggested break from work, or even an alert to their therapist. All delivered through technology they already use every day." My mother leaned forward, her marketing background clearly engaged. That's not just an app, is it? That's like having a personal mental health professional available 24/7. "Exactly," I said, feeling a spark of the passion that had driven me to build MindSpace in the first place. "But more than that, traditional therapy requires recognizing you need help, making an appointment, finding time during business hours, paying potentially hundreds of dollars per session. Our technology democratizes mental health support. A single mother working 2 jobs who can't afford therapy gets the same personalized mental health insights as a CEO with unlimited healthcare benefits." Jessica nodded slowly, her medical training helping her grasp the implications. "You're talking about preventive mental health care, like how we use vaccines to prevent disease rather than just treating symptoms after people get sick. This is why the corporate contracts were so significant," I continued, encouraged by their growing understanding. Companies weren't just buying an employee perk, they were investing in technology that could reduce healthcare costs, increase productivity, and create healthier workplace cultures. Microsoft reported a 38% reduction in stress-related sick days after implementing MindSpace company-wide. My father set down the papers and rubbed his temples. "I've been thinking about all the conversations we've had over the years. Every time you tried to explain your work, I was listening for things I recognized: revenue models, market penetration, traditional business metrics. I never asked about the human impact. Because human impact isn't how you were taught to measure business success," I said, not accusingly, but matter-of-factly. "Your generation learned that profit equals purpose. But my generation is building companies where purpose drives profit. MindSpace succeeded financially because it solved a real problem that millions of people desperately needed solved." My mother was quiet for a long moment, processing. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Samantha, I owe you an apology that goes beyond tonight. I've been in public relations for 25 years. My job is understanding how people communicate value, how messages get received and interpreted, and I completely failed to hear what you were telling us about your company." She stood and walked to the window overlooking their small garden, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. "Worse than that, I actively discouraged you. Remember when you wanted to speak at that wellness conference in Denver 2 years ago? I told you it sounded like an expensive networking event that wouldn't lead anywhere productive. The memory hit me like a physical blow. That Denver conference had been a pivotal moment for MindSpace. I'd met 3 enterprise clients who became major accounts and connected with a meditation expert who later joined our advisory board. But I'd nearly declined the speaking invitation because my mother's skepticism had made me doubt its value. That conference led to our healthcare partnership strategy, I said softly. Cleveland Clinic approached me after my presentation there. Oh, sweetheart. The words came out as barely more than a whisper. Jessica pulled her knees to her chest. I've been thinking about all the times you tried to include us in your work life. Remember when you invited me to that medical innovation panel you were speaking on? I said I was too busy with residency, but I made time to go to David's work events, didn't I? The observation stung because it was true. Jessica had attended dozens of David's Goldman Sachs functions, even during the most demanding periods of her medical training. But she'd consistently declined my invitations to industry events, conferences, or even casual meetups with my team. I think I was protective of my own success, she continued, her voice small. You left traditional medicine to build something innovative, and part of me worried that if you succeeded, it would somehow diminish what I'd accomplished through conventional routes. It was competitive and small-minded, and I'm ashamed of it. Her honesty was both painful and liberating. We'd never addressed the underlying competition between us, the way our parents had inadvertently pitted us against each other by comparing our different paths. My father cleared his throat. I want to share something I've never told either of you. 5 years ago, Richard Harrison approached me about Morrison & Associates potentially representing some tech companies. I dismissed the idea, said our firm focused on established industries, not flash-in-the-pan startups. He specifically mentioned the wellness technology sector as an emerging market worth watching. He paused, the weight of missed opportunity evident in his expression. If I'd listened to him then, maybe I would have understood what Samantha was building. Maybe our firm could have even supported her growth. Instead, I let my biases about what constitutes legitimate business blind me to an industry revolution happening in my own daughter's career. The admission hung in the air between us, a recognition of how his professional prejudices had shaped his parental support. It wasn't just that he hadn't understood my work. He'd actively dismissed the entire sector I was helping to create. Dad, can I ask you something? I said gently. What exactly did you think I was doing these past 3 years? Like, concretely, what did you imagine my work life looked like? He looked uncomfortable, but answered honestly. I pictured you, in that small apartment, working on your laptop, maybe with 1 or 2 other people, building what I assumed was essentially a fancy iPhone app that played meditation recordings. I thought you were charging maybe $10 or $20 a month to people who wanted guided breathing exercises. The gap between his perception and reality was staggering. While he'd imagined me running a solo operation from my apartment, I'd actually been leading a team of 43 specialists, managing partnerships with Fortune 500 companies, and developing technology that required expertise in artificial intelligence, behavioral psychology, biometric analysis, and healthcare integration. Mom, what about you? I asked. She turned from the window, her expression pained. I thought you were running a small lifestyle business, something that might support you modestly but wasn't. Scalable. I worried constantly about your retirement savings, your health insurance. I didn't understand that startups could become major corporations. But you work in PR, Jessica pointed out gently. Don't you represent companies that started as startups? Established companies that were once startups, my mother corrected. By the time they're our clients, they've already proven themselves by traditional metrics. I somehow couldn't bridge the gap between the tiny startup phase and the successful corporation phase. I couldn't picture Samantha's work evolving into something significant. The failure of imagination was perhaps more damaging than direct criticism would have been. They'd literally been unable to envision me succeeding on the scale I was actually achieving. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Press coverage is exploding. Wall Street Journal calling it a watershed moment for female entrepreneurs in wellness tech. CNN wants you for morning show Monday. How are you handling tonight? I showed the message to my family. My father read it twice, his eyebrows rising higher each time. Samantha, he said slowly, I'm beginning to understand that we didn't just fail to support your business. We actively undermined your confidence during what must have been an incredibly challenging period. The hardest part wasn't the long hours or the financial uncertainty, I admitted. It was carrying the weight of your disappointment while trying to build something I believed would change people's lives. Every family dinner became a referendum on my choices. Every holiday became an opportunity for relatives to suggest backup plans. Jessica winced. Like Aunt Linda's pharmaceutical sales suggestion tonight. Or when Cousin Mark offered to get me an interview at his insurance company last Christmas, I added. These felt like kindnesses to you, but to me, they were constant. Messages that what I was building wasn't viable. My mother returned to her chair, sitting down slowly as if her bones had aged a decade in the past few hours. We need to talk about the money, she said bluntly. $54 million in personal wealth. That's more than your father and I have accumulated in 40 years of combined careers. The scale of your success is, frankly, overwhelming. It's not just about the money, though, I said firmly. Yes, the financial outcome is validating, but the real measure of MindSpace's success is impact. We have data showing that our platform has helped over 2 million people develop better coping strategies for anxiety and depression. Corporate partners report significantly improved workplace mental health metrics. Healthcare systems are integrating our technology into treatment protocols. How do you measure something like that? My father asked, his analytical mind clearly struggling with metrics beyond traditional business indicators. User retention rates, engagement patterns, biometric improvements, self-reported wellness scores, clinical outcomes when integrated. With traditional therapy, I listed. We worked with university researchers to conduct peer-reviewed studies on our impact. The evidence base is extensive. Jessica leaned forward, her medical background making her particularly interested in the clinical aspects. Have you published in medical journals? 16 published studies so far, with more in review. The Journal of Digital Health featured our work on predictive mental health interventions as their cover story last September. My father was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than skeptical. Samantha, I'm realizing I've been measuring your success by entirely wrong criteria. I was looking for traditional business markers, corporate structure, physical office space, formal industry recognition, and missing revolutionary innovation happening in a field I didn't understand. The innovation wasn't just technological, I explained. It was also about building a different kind of company culture. MindSpace practices what we teach. Our employees have unlimited mental health support, flexible schedules based on personal rhythms rather than arbitrary hours, and decision-making processes that prioritize psychological safety. That's part of why the acquisition was so complex, I continued. Headspace wasn't just buying our technology, they were buying our approach to human-centered business practices. They want to scale not just our platform, but our philosophy. My mother looked up sharply. Is that why you're staying on as Chief Innovation Officer rather than just walking away with your money? Partly, but also because the work isn't finished. Mental health stigma, accessibility barriers, the crisis of workplace burnout, these problems extend far beyond what one company can solve. The acquisition gives us resources to tackle systemic issues, to influence industry standards, to reach populations we couldn't serve as an independent startup. The room fell silent as they absorbed this. The recognition that my career decision hadn't been about choosing stability versus risk, but about choosing conventional impact versus revolutionary change. Jessica broke the silence. Sam, I need to tell you something. 6 months ago, I used MindSpace myself. I was going through a particularly brutal period at the hospital, dealing with some pediatric cases that were really getting to me emotionally. A colleague recommended the app. She paused, tears building in her eyes. It helped, really helped. The personalized stress management protocols, the way it adapted to my schedule, the gentle accountability. I used it for 3 months and felt more emotionally resilient than I had since starting residency. You never mentioned it, I said. Softly. I was embarrassed. Here I was, criticizing your career choice while secretly benefiting from what you'd built. When I saw how effective MindSpace was, I should have connected that to respect for your work. Instead, I compartmentalized. I could acknowledge the app was valuable while still viewing your business as somehow less serious than traditional careers. My father stood and walked to his bookshelf, pulling out a thick folder. I have a confession too, he said, returning with what I recognized as his professional portfolio. 6 months ago, Morrison & Associates pitched for the corporate communications contract for a major healthcare initiative focused on workplace mental wellness. We lost the bid. He opened the folder to reveal detailed research on the digital wellness market, company profiles, trend analyses, and prominently featured throughout was information about MindSpace. Our research team identified MindSpace as the industry leader in personalized mental health technology, he continued, his voice heavy with irony. I read every word of this analysis, studied your company's growth trajectory, learned about your partnerships and accolades. I never connected it to my own daughter. The paper showed charts of MindSpace's user growth, revenue projections, competitive analysis, and market position. There were even quotes from my interviews in industry publications. My headshot appeared multiple times, and one page was literally titled Key Industry Innovators with my name and photo prominently displayed. How could you not make the connection? Jessica asked, incredulous. Because I couldn't reconcile the daughter I saw struggling in a tiny apartment with the CEO described in these reports, my father admitted. The cognitive dissonance was too great. It was easier to assume these were different companies with similar names than to acknowledge I'd been completely wrong about my own child's capabilities. The revelation was stunning. He'd professionally researched my company, understood its value and market position, but psychologically couldn't accept that I was its creator. My mother picked up one of the research papers, scanning it with professional interest. This market analysis is incredibly detailed. MindSpace is positioned as the clear industry leader. Revenue growth, user satisfaction, retention rates, all best in class. The most painful part, my father continued, is that I probably could have helped. Morrison & Associates has relationships with every major corporation in Chicago. We could have facilitated introductions, provided strategic communication support, helped with the acquisition process. Instead, my inability to see your success meant I couldn't offer the professional support that was mine to give. The weight of lost opportunity settled over us like a heavy blanket. Not just emotional support, but professional resources that could have accelerated MindSpace's growth even further. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Dr. Sarah Kim, Headspace's CEO. I showed the screen to my family. I should probably take this, I said apologetically. Samantha, congratulations on the leak. Dr. Kim's voice was cheerful despite the early hour on the West Coast. Stock market loves it. Up 7% in after-hours trading. Media response is overwhelmingly positive. Female founder, bootstrapped success, social impact. It's hitting every narrative sweet spot. I'm actually with my family, I said. They just learned about the acquisition tonight. Perfect timing then. Listen, I'm flying to Chicago tomorrow. I'd love to meet them, maybe take everyone to dinner. The board is thrilled about your family story. Successful entrepreneur from traditional business family, breaking barriers, creating new paradigms. It's exactly the image we want to project as we integrate MindSpace into Headspace's broader mission. I looked at my parents, then at Jessica, seeing them with new eyes. Not just as the family who had failed to understand my ambitions, but as people genuinely trying to bridge years of miscommunication and build something healthier going forward. That sounds wonderful, I replied. I'll confirm details and send you their information. After ending the call, I set my phone aside and looked at my family. The documents spread across the coffee table, the evidence of success they'd missed, the recognition of mistakes made and opportunities lost. All of it was now simply backdrop to what had become a different kind of conversation. Headspace's CEO wants to take us all to dinner tomorrow, I announced. She's interested in meeting the family that raised someone willing to challenge conventional approaches to business success. My father laughed, but it was tinged with irony. I'm not sure we can take credit for raising an innovator, given how hard we tried to convince you to be conventional. Maybe that's exactly why, Jessica suggested thoughtfully. Maybe growing up in an environment that's so strongly valued, traditional success gave you the motivation to prove that other forms of achievement were equally valid. It was an interesting theory, and perhaps not entirely wrong. My drive to succeed with MindSpace had been fueled partly by a desire to prove that purpose-driven businesses could be both profitable and transformative. The family pressure to conform had paradoxically strengthened my resolve to create something unprecedented. What happens now? My mother asked quietly. How do we move forward as a family? How do we rebuild trust after admitting we've spent 3 years fundamentally misunderstanding your life's work? The question hung in the air, honest and vulnerable. For the first time in hours, I didn't have an immediate answer. The revelation had cracked open years of accumulated resentment and disappointment. But understanding the source of our problems didn't automatically solve them. I think, I said slowly, we start by acknowledging that the damage was real. My success doesn't erase 3 years of feeling unsupported by the people whose opinion mattered most to me, and your regret doesn't immediately rebuild the trust that was eroded. They nodded, accepting the difficult truth. But, I continued, feeling my way toward something hopeful, I also think this conversation is already the beginning of something different. For the first time, you're asking to understand, rather than waiting for me to prove myself worthy of understanding. Jessica wiped away tears she'd been trying to hold back. Sam, what you've built, it's not just a company, it's a mission. You've created something that genuinely helps people live better lives. I'm sorry it took a public revelation for us to see that. My mother reached across and took my hand, a gesture that surprised me with its rarity. Samantha, I want to learn about your work. Really learn. Not just the business metrics, but the vision behind it, the people whose lives you've changed, the innovations you're planning. I want to understand what drives you. And I want to help, my father added firmly. Morrison and Associates should be representing companies like MindSpace. We should be championing innovation in wellness technology, not dismissing it. I may have missed the opportunity to support your startup phase, but I can certainly support your next chapter. The offers of understanding and support were more than I dared hope for, but they also felt fragile, like promises that would need to be tested against the patterns of a lifetime. I appreciate that, I said carefully. And I want to believe it's possible. But rebuilding trust will take time. It will require you to actually show interest in my work, even when it's not making headlines. It will mean supporting my choices, even when you don't fully understand them. We know, my mother said softly. We've had 3 years to demonstrate our lack of faith in you. It may take longer to prove we've truly changed. As midnight approached, exhaustion began to settle over all of us. The emotional intensity of the evening, combined with the revelation that would transform our family dynamics, had left us drained, but strangely closer than we'd been in years. "I should go," I said, gathering the acquisition documents. "Tomorrow? We'll be busy with media calls and integration meetings." "Samantha," my father said as I reached the door, "there's one more thing I need to say. What you've accomplished is extraordinary, not just financially, but in terms of impact and innovation. I'm proud of you, not proud of the success I understand, but proud of your vision, your persistence, and your refusal to accept limitations others tried to impose on you." The words I'd waited years to hear finally came, not wrapped in conditions or qualifications, but offered simply and directly. They couldn't erase the past, but they opened a door to a different future. "Thank you, Dad," I replied, my voice catching, slightly. "That means more than you know." As I stepped out into the Chicago night, I realized that tonight had given me something even more valuable than family understanding. It had given me the recognition that I'd built something remarkable, not because of their support, but despite their doubts. And perhaps, moving forward, that strength would allow me to accept their changed attitudes without needing them to erase the disappointment of the past. The empire I'd built was no longer invisible to anyone. Most importantly, it was no longer invisible to myself. 6 months after Jessica's wedding, I stood in the penthouse conference room of the newly constructed MindSpace Innovation Center in downtown Chicago, watching the sunrise paint Lake Michigan in brilliant oranges and pinks. The irony wasn't lost on me that this building, 32 floors of cutting-edge wellness technology research and development, stood just 3 blocks from Morrison & Associates offices, where my parents had spent decades building traditional corporate communications campaigns without ever imagining their daughter would revolutionize an entire industry. The past half year had transformed everything. The Headspace acquisition had officially closed, making me one of the youngest female executives in the wellness technology sector. But more importantly, it had provided the resources to expand MindSpace's mission in ways I'd only dreamed of during those early days in my Lincoln Park apartment. Maya knocked on the glass door, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression she got whenever our latest user metrics exceeded projections. "Ready for the anniversary?" she asked, joining me at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Today marked exactly 6 months since the wedding revelation, a milestone we'd decided to celebrate by announcing our newest initiative, the MindSpace Foundation, a nonprofit arm focused on providing free mental health technology to underserved communities, schools, and healthcare systems that couldn't afford corporate licensing fees. The Chicago Tribune is calling it Silicon Valley Comes to the Midwest, Maya reported, scrolling through her tablet. But they're missing the bigger story. You didn't bring Silicon Valley thinking here. You created something entirely different. Something authentically Chicago, rooted in community impact rather than just disruption for disruption's sake. She was right. Unlike the typical tech bro mentality of moving fast and breaking things, MindSpace had grown deliberately, prioritizing user well-being and sustainable practices over rapid scaling. It was a philosophy that had initially puzzled West Coast investors, but ultimately proved more effective than traditional startup approaches. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Dad's bringing Mom to the center tour today. She spent last night reading everything she could find about therapeutic AI. I think you've created a monster of curiosity in her." The smile that spread across my face was genuine. Over the past months, my family's transformation had been as dramatic as MindSpace's. Expansion. My mother had enrolled in a digital marketing certification program specifically focused on wellness technology. My father had restructured Morrison & Associates to include a dedicated practice area for health innovation companies, and Jessica had begun collaborating with our medical advisory board on protocols for integrating mindfulness into pediatric treatment plans. "The press conference is in 2 hours, Maya reminded me. "And Dr. Kim will be joining virtually from London to discuss the global expansion plans. Are you nervous?" "Excited," I corrected. though butterflies danced in my stomach. Today's announcement would unveil not just the foundation, but also MindSpace's newest breakthrough. An AI system capable of detecting early signs of eating disorders, addiction patterns, and suicidal ideation through subtle changes in user interaction patterns, potentially saving thousands of lives through early intervention. The elevator chimed, and I turned to see my parents stepping into the conference room, their expressions mixing awe and pride in a way that still felt new and fragile. My mother wore a crisp blazer over dark jeans, her concession to the tech, industry's more casual dress code, while my father carried a leather portfolio that I suspected contained notes from his research on our latest innovations. "Samantha, this view is incredible," my mother said, moving to the windows. "The whole city looks different from up here." "It always does when you're seeing it from a new perspective," I replied, the double meaning hanging in the air between us. My father approached more cautiously, still sometimes uncertain in this space where his daughter had become the recognized expert. "We brought something for you," he said, removing a framed photograph from his portfolio. The image showed me at age 8, sitting at the family computer with intense concentration, lines of basic code visible on the screen behind me. I'd been trying to program a simple anxiety assessment quiz after watching my mother struggle with stress during a particularly difficult period at work. "I found this last week while organizing old photo albums," my mother explained. "You were already trying to help people feel better through technology even then. I wanted you to remember that we documented your innovations, even if we didn't understand their significance at the time." The gesture meant more than any grand apologetic speech could have. It was acknowledgement that my path hadn't been a sudden deviation from family values, but rather a continuation of something that had always been present, just unrecognized. "Thank you," I said softly, placing the photo on my desk where it would remind me daily of how far we'd all come. The next hour passed in a blur of final preparations. The press room filled with journalists from major business publications, tech blogs, and wellness industry magazines. Video crews set up cameras while social media managers prepared to live stream the event across multiple platforms. The energy was electric with anticipation. Richard Harrison arrived just minutes before the scheduled start, looking every inch the distinguished business leader who'd inadvertently triggered our family's transformation 6 months ago. He'd since become one of MindSpace's most vocal advocates, frequently speaking at industry conferences about the business case for prioritizing employee mental health. "Samantha," he said, approaching with his characteristic warm smile, "I have to admit, when I made that comment at Jessica's wedding, I had no idea I was lighting the fuse on a family revolution. Your parents tell me they've become quite the wellness technology evangelists." "They've certainly embraced the learning curve," I replied diplomatically, though the truth was more nuanced. While my parents had made genuine efforts to understand my work, the process hadn't been without challenges. There had been awkward moments when my mother tried to offer PR advice for an industry she was still learning, or when my father suggested traditional business strategies that didn't align with our values-driven approach. But those stumbles had led to deeper conversations about different models of success, about how innovation often required rejecting conventional wisdom, and about the courage it took to build something unprecedented while facing skepticism from those you love most. Maya appeared at my elbow with final notes. 43 media outlets confirmed attendance, plus streaming to 17 countries. The foundation board is ready, Dr. Kim is connected from London, and the demonstration of the new AI diagnostic tool tested perfectly. As we moved toward the press room, I caught sight of a familiar figure near the back. Emma Chen, a 22-year-old computer science graduate from Northwestern, who'd joined MindSpace 8 months ago as our youngest developer. She'd grown up in Chicago's Chinatown, the daughter of restaurant owners who'd worked 80-hour weeks to provide her with educational opportunities they'd never had. Emma's story resonated with mine in unexpected ways. Her parents had also struggled to understand her career choice, Couldn't fathom why she'd rejected lucrative offers from traditional tech giants to join a wellness startup. But unlike my experience, Emma had found immediate support and mentorship within MindSpace's culture. "Ready to change the world again, boss?" Emma asked with the confidence of youth and talent, holding up her tablet displaying the new AI diagnostic interface. "We've been changing it all along," I replied. "Today we're just making it official." The press conference began with Dr. Kim's virtual presentation from London, outlining Headspace's global expansion plans and MindSpace's central role in their vision for democratizing mental health support worldwide. The integration had exceeded every projection, with MindSpace's personalization technology now reaching over 50 million users across 6 continents. When my turn came to address the audience, I found myself looking past the cameras to where my family sat in the front row. Jessica was taking notes with the focused intensity she brought to her medical practice. My parents sat side by side, my mother occasionally whispering clarifications to my father when technical terms arose, their mutual effort to understand touching in its obvious sincerity. 6 months ago, many people learned about MindSpace for the first time through a viral social media moment that exposed how even the people closest to us can fail to recognize innovation when it doesn't fit their preconceived notions of success. I began, earning knowing chuckles from the audience. Today, I want to talk about a different kind of recognition. The recognition that mental health is not a luxury service for those who can afford therapy, but a fundamental human right that technology can help make accessible to everyone. I clicked to the first slide, showing a world map with heat zones indicating areas of highest mental health need versus available resources. The disparities were stark. Rural communities, low-income neighborhoods, developing countries, all showed massive gaps between need and access. The MindSpace Foundation launches today with a mission to bridge these gaps. We're partnering with schools in underserved communities to provide free mental health education and support tools. We're working with community health centers to integrate our AI diagnostic capabilities into primary care settings, and we're developing simplified versions of our platform that can function on low-bandwidth connections and older devices. The slides that followed showed pilot programs already underway, a partnership with Chicago Public Schools that had reduced anxiety-related absences by 47%, a collaboration with rural health clinics in Appalachia that had identified and treated twice as many cases of depression as traditional screening methods, an initiative in refugee camps that provided trauma counseling through multilingual AI avatars. But technology alone isn't enough, I continued, sensing the audience's deep engagement. Mental health support requires human connection, cultural sensitivity, and community understanding. That's why the Foundation is also training local mentors, funding research into culturally specific wellness practices, and ensuring that our innovations enhance rather than replace human connection. Emma stepped forward for the demonstration of our latest breakthrough, an AI system that could detect subtle signs of mental health crises through changes in user behavior patterns, potentially intervening before people even recognized they needed help. The system learns your personal baselines for everything from typing speed to sleep patterns to word choice in text messages, Emma explained with technical precision beyond her years. When multiple indicators suggest emerging mental health challenges, it provides gentle interventions, maybe suggesting a brief mindfulness exercise, connecting you with peer support, or in serious cases, alerting mental health professionals with your consent. The demonstration was flawless, showing how the AI could identify warning signs days or weeks before traditional assessment methods, potentially preventing crises rather than just responding to them. The audience asked thoughtful questions about privacy protections, ethical considerations, and implementation challenges, all areas where MindSpace had invested heavily in developing responsible innovation practices. During the Q&A period, a journalist from Fast Company raised her hand. "Ms. Morrison, there's been a lot of coverage about how your family initially didn't understand your business. Given that they work in communications and marketing, what lessons Does this offer other innovators about bridging generational and professional divides? The question was pointed but fair, and I glanced at my parents before answering. My father gave me an encouraging nod. I think the lesson is that expertise in one area doesn't automatically translate to understanding innovation in another, I replied carefully. My parents are brilliant at what they do, but they were looking for familiar markers of success in an unfamiliar context. The real breakthrough came when they stopped trying to evaluate my work by traditional business metrics and started asking about the human impact we were creating. My mother stood up from her seat, a surprising move that caused a small stir in the room. "May I add something?" she asked, and I nodded, curious where she was going with this. As someone who spent decades in traditional corporate communications, I want to say that Samantha's approach has fundamentally changed how I think about business success, she said, her voice carrying the authority of her professional experience. We're so focused on quarterly earnings and stock prices that we sometimes miss companies creating genuine value for society. MindSpace proved that purpose-driven businesses can be more profitable and sustainable than companies focused solely on financial metrics. The moment was electric. Here was my mother, publicly acknowledging not just her previous misunderstanding, but advocating for the very business philosophy she'd once dismissed. Several journalists scribbled notes furiously, sensing a powerful narrative about changing attitudes toward social entrepreneurship. After the press conference concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Dr. Kim's face appeared on the main screen for a private video call with our core team and family. "Samantha, that was extraordinary," she said, her enthusiasm evident even through the digital connection. "The response on social media has been unprecedented. MindSpace Foundation is trending globally, and we're seeing partnership inquiries from organizations in 43 countries. More importantly," Maya added, checking her tablet, "the foundation website crashed from traffic volume. We've already received over 10,000 applications from organizations wanting to participate in pilot programs." The success was gratifying, but what meant more to me was the shift in my family's engagement. Instead of polite congratulations and subtle suggestions for improvement, they were asking technical questions, offering genuine strategic insights, and connecting our work to their own professional expertise. "Samantha," my father said, "I've been thinking about the implementation challenges for the school programs. Morrison and Associates has relationships with dozens of school districts through our public sector practice. I'd like to facilitate some introductions, help with the communication strategy for parent and teacher engagement." The offer was practical and valuable, but more than that, it represented a fundamental shift in how he saw our work, not as something to be fixed or redirected, but as something worthy of his professional support. "That would be incredibly helpful, Dad," I replied, meaning it completely. As the afternoon wound down and the media crews packed up their equipment, our small group moved to my office for a more private celebration. Maya had arranged for dinner to be delivered from my favorite Thai restaurant, and someone had brought champagne, though given our company's focus on wellness, we'd also provided elaborate mocktails for those who preferred them. Jessica raised her glass for a toast. 6 months ago, our family had a dramatic wake-up call about recognizing success in unconventional forms. Today, we're celebrating not just Samantha's achievements, but the growth we've all experienced in learning to support innovation even when we don't immediately understand it. To MindSpace, my mother added, and to the reminder that changing, the world often looks different than we expect it to. As glasses clinked and conversation flowed, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since that shocking moment at Jessica's wedding. The revelation had been painful, exposing years of miscommunication and misplaced priorities, but it had also created space for something healthier to emerge. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen, one of our pilot program partners in Beijing. "First week results from the Youth Mental Health Initiative are beyond expectations. 78% improvement in reported well-being scores." The AI is actually learning Mandarin emotional expressions faster than our human translators. How soon can we expand to other provinces? I showed the message to the group, watching my father's eyes widen as he processed the international scope of what we were accomplishing. Samantha, he said quietly, I'm beginning to understand that what you built isn't just a company, it's a movement. It was always a movement, I replied gently. I just needed the resources to scale it properly. Maya stood up with her tablet, clearly excited about something. Okay, I have to share the best news of the day. Remember Emma's idea about gamifying mental health education for teenagers? The pilot program in 5 Chicago high schools just published their results. She connected her tablet to the large screen, displaying charts that made everyone in the room lean forward. Average engagement with traditional mental health resources among teens, 12%, she began. Engagement with Emma's gamified MindSpace modules, 89%. But here's the really incredible part. Students using the program showed measurable improvement in emotional regulation skills that translated to better academic performance, fewer disciplinary issues, and improved peer relationships. Emma beamed with pride, but there was also determination in her expression. This is just the beginning, she said confidently. I want to scale this to every high school in America, maybe globally. Gen Z deserves better mental health support than what previous generations had access to. Watching Emma speak with such conviction reminded me why I'd been so passionate about building MindSpace in the first place. It wasn't about proving my worth to skeptical family members or achieving conventional markers of success. It was about creating tools that could genuinely improve how people experience their daily emotional lives. As dinner concluded and people began to leave, my parents lingered, clearly wanting to share something privately. Samantha, my mother began, her voice carrying a weight I'd learned to recognize over the past months. Your father and I have been talking about legacy, about what we want to be remembered for professionally and personally. My father nodded, taking up the thread. We spent so many years focused on building traditional success that we almost missed the most meaningful achievement in our family. Not Jessica's medical career, impressive as it is, and not our own professional accomplishments, but what you've created here. We want to be part of it, my mother added firmly. Not just supportive family members, but active contributors to the mission. Morrison & Associates is restructuring to become a certified B Corporation, prioritizing social impact alongside profit. And we're launching a pro bono division focused exclusively on supporting wellness technology startups founded by underrepresented entrepreneurs. The announcement stunned me. B Corporation certification required meeting rigorous standards for social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. For a traditional PR firm to make that transition represented a fundamental philosophical shift. Are you sure? I asked. That's a significant business transformation. You showed us that sustainable success doesn't require choosing between profit and purpose, my father replied. Morrison & Associates should reflect those values too. As my parents left, promising to send over their draft B Corporation application, for my review, I found myself alone in the office for the first time all day. The city sparkled below, Lake Michigan reflecting the lights like scattered stars. Maya knocked on the doorframe. Penny for your thoughts, boss? I was just thinking about how different today felt from that night at Jessica's wedding. Said. 6 months ago, I felt like I was fighting to be seen, to be understood, to be valued for what I'd built. Tonight felt like collaboration. Like we're all working toward the same vision now. That's what happens when people stop trying to fit you into their preconceptions and start engaging with what you're actually creating, Maya observed wisely. My phone lit up with notifications from social media, news alerts, and partnership inquiries. The foundation announcement had generated even more interest than we'd projected, with venture capitalists offering funding, universities proposing research collaborations, and governments inquiring about national implementations. But among all the business communications, one message stood out. It was from Dr. Maria Santos, the school counselor in South Chicago who'd helped design our youth mental health modules. Samantha, I wanted you to know that yesterday, a student who'd been using MindSpace for 3 months came to me and said, I never thought I could talk to adults about feeling sad, but the app helped me practice what to say. She got the help she needed because technology gave her tools to understand and communicate her emotions. You're not just building a business, you're giving young people language for their inner lives. The message brought tears to my eyes, reminding me that behind all the metrics and media coverage and business achievements were real people whose lives had been tangibly improved by what we'd created. As I finally prepared to leave the office, I paused at the framed photo my parents had brought. 8-year-old me, already trying to solve human problems through technology. The journey from that moment to this had been longer and more challenging than I could have imagined, filled with doubt from others and sometimes from myself. But standing in this space we'd built, surrounded by evidence of impact reaching across continents and communities, I realized that the little girl in that photo had been onto something profound. The vision had always been clear, even when others couldn't see it. The empire was no longer invisible. More importantly, it was sustainable, growing, and creating ripples of positive change that extended far beyond what any one person could have achieved alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, scaling internationally, navigating complex healthcare regulations, ensuring our technology remained accessible and ethical as it grew more sophisticated. But tonight, I felt something I hadn't experienced during those early years of building MindSpace. Complete confidence that the mission would continue regardless of external validation. We weren't just changing individual lives anymore. We were changing how society approached mental health, how families communicated about emotional well-being, how technology could serve human flourishing rather than just entertainment or profit. The invisible had become undeniable. And this was only the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.